Imagine hating your family so much that your final act on earth is to create a legal trap designed to torture them for generations. This isn't the plot of a gothic horror novel or a Hollywood thriller. This is the true story of a man whose petty, post mortem revenge was so catastrophically effective it nearly collapsed the British legal system, panicked the Prime Minister, and forced the government to rewrite the rules of inheritance forever. Welcome to Exhibit Absurd. Our story begins with Peter Thellusson. Born in Geneva to a prominent banking family, Peter moved to London in the 1760s and proved to be an absolute powerhouse of finance. He initially managed the London branch of his family's bank in partnership with Jacques Necker, making a fortune through government loans and grain speculation. But he didn't stop there. Peter opened his own finance house and invested heavily in the transatlantic sugar and tobacco trade. When plantation owners defaulted on his massive loans, Peter seized their properties, taking direct control of lucrative slave plantations in Grenada and Montserrat. He was so wealthy, he actively hunted for an Irish peerage, relentlessly lobbying British Prime Minister William Pitt the Younger, though he died a commoner. It was actually his eldest son, Peter Isaac Thellusson, who also served as a director of the Bank of England from 1787 to 1806, who eventually secured the family's aristocratic ambitions, becoming the first Baron Rendlesham in 1806. If you visit the UK today, you can still see the father's architectural legacy. He built Plato Lodge in Kent, which is now a primary school, and purchased the massive Broadsworth estate in Yorkshire, which is now maintained by English Heritage. To understand how rich Peter was when he died in 1797, we have to look at the numbers. His estate generated an annual real estate income of £5,000 sterling, which was about 22,000 US dollars at the time. In today's money, that translates to roughly £800,000 or $1 million. On top of that, his total personal fortune exceeded £600,000 sterling, about $2.7 million in 1797. Today, that massive fortune would be worth well over £95 million or 120 million US dollars. With that much money, Peter's 3 sons and his wife assumed they were set for life. But Peter had a massive problem. He utterly despised his family's lifestyle. He was a product of strict, old-school merchant discipline. His sons, however, had grown fond of the high society British aristocratic lifestyle. Peter watched them spend money on fine clothes, gambling, and social climbing, and he became utterly convinced that if he left them his fortune, they would squander it within a decade. Instead of talking to them like a normal father, Peter decided to use the English legal system to execute the ultimate act of passive-aggressive revenge. He sat down with his lawyers and drafted a will designed to ensure his immediate family would never touch a single cent of his core wealth. The terms of Peter Thellusson's will were completely unhinged. He ordered that his entire £600,000 fortune be locked away in a strict legal trust. He mandated that the money could not be distributed to any of his living children or grandchildren. Instead, the trust was ordered to buy up land and accumulate compound interest until every single one of his sons and every single one of his grandsons alive at the time of his death had passed away. Only after all 9 of these specific men were dead could the trust finally be dissolved. Actuaries at the time did the math and realized this timeline would take roughly 75 to 80 years to clear. At a standard 5% compound interest rate, Peter's £600,000 was projected to swell to an economy-crushing £19 million to £30 million sterling. In the mid-1800s, that would have converted to around 90 million to 145 million US dollars. In today's terms, that represents a mind-boggling $4 billion to $6 billion. Peter's plan, if left unchecked, would literally allow his ghost to control more wealth than most European nations. To put that into perspective, $145 million was nearly 10 times what the United States paid for the entire Louisiana Purchase, and was larger than the entire annual government budgets of nations like Greece, Sweden, and Denmark combined. The contemporary press and public were horrified. The fear was that by the time the trust paid out, the compound interest would have amassed a fortune so large it would rival the British national debt and disrupt the entire economy. When Peter died in July 1797 and the will was read, his family was predictably horrified. While the £600,000 core of his empire was locked away, Peter left them with relatively minor allowances. His wife was given £2,000 a year, about $8,800 US dollars at the time, which is roughly £320,000 sterling or $400,000 today. His daughters were left £12,000 each, around $52,800 then, or £1.9 million sterling today. And his sons received a lump sum of just £7,600 each, or £1.2 million today. While that sounds like a lot to us, it was an absolute insult coming from a father sitting on a $120 million empire. In the will itself, Peter explicitly stated that the massive accumulated fortune was to be reserved and settled solely on the eldest male lineal descendant then living. He even included a petty defensive clause in the document stating he had earned his money with industry and honesty, and hoped the legislature would not dare to alter his plans. A mythical unborn grandchild was set to become the richest person on earth. In 1798, the furious family launched a massive legal campaign to have the will thrown out, sparking the infamous court case Thellusson versus Woodford. They argued that the will was against public policy, cruel, and a malicious manipulation of property law. But the courts were stuck. Technically, Peter hadn't broken any existing laws. He had just engineered a flawless loophole. The case dragged on for decades. Generations of Thellussons grew old and died while fighting the trust. The family went to war with the trustees. The trustees went to war with the courts, and the entire estate became a black hole of litigation. But karma has a bizarre sense of humor, and Peter's master plan suffered from a fatal, absurd irony. To defend the trust against the family's endless lawsuits, the estate had to hire the most expensive lawyers in England. Because the case lasted for over 60 years, the legal fees became astronomical. Every time a court met to discuss the compound interest, the lawyers subtracted their massive fees directly from the fortune. Court costs, administrative fees, and management blunders completely ate away at the growth. By the time the last grandson finally died in 1856, and the case was settled in 1859, the grand fortune hadn't grown into billions. After adjusting for the endless litigation, the amount left over for the final heir was barely more than the original amount Peter had left back in 1797. The lawyers, not the family, had inherited the empire. The sheer absurdity of the case permanently altered British culture. It directly inspired Charles Dickens to write his famous novel Bleak House, creating the fictional lawsuit Jarndyce and Jarndyce, a case so choked by institutional bureaucracy and legal fees that the characters' lives are ruined waiting for a payout. But the true legacy of Peter's spite was legislative. Long before the case even ended, the British government was so terrified by the math of Peter's will that Parliament panicked. Politicians realized that if another eccentric billionaire successfully pulled this off, a dead man could accidentally buy up all the land in England. To stop this madness, Parliament rushed to pass the Accumulations Act 1800, forever known in history books as the Thellusson Act. It made it completely illegal to lock up an estate to accumulate wealth for longer than 21 years after a person's death. Peter Thellusson wanted to build a multi-billion-dollar empire for his distant descendants out of pure, unadulterated spite for his children. Instead, he managed to achieve the exact opposite. He funded an entire generation of wealthy lawyers, inspired a literary masterpiece, and forced the British government to completely change the law of the land. If you want to uncover more evidence from the most bizarre, petty, and chaotic archives of history, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. We will see you next time on Exhibit Absurd.